Hegel's Key Ideas, a preliminary outline. Introduction. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 1770 to 1831, is one of the most influential figures in Western philosophy, known for his deep and complex ideas that span the realms of logic, metaphysics, history, and political theory. His work remains central to philosophical inquiry today because he offers a comprehensive system of thought that seeks to integrate diverse aspects of reality, nature, society, art, religion, and human consciousness, into a unified whole. At the heart of Hegel's philosophy is the conviction that reality is rational and dynamic, and that our understanding of it develops through a dialectical process. Hegel's thought is grounded in a principle known as Absolute Idealism, which holds that reality is the manifestation of a single all-encompassing rational structure, or absolute. For Hegel, history, thought, and existence are not static, but are continually evolving through contradictions and resolutions, a process he famously articulated as dialectics. In this method, contradictions are not merely problematic, but are necessary for progress. The conflict between opposing forces, thesis and antithesis, ultimately leads to a higher unity, synthesis. Hegel's conception of dialectics is not merely a logical method, but also a way of understanding the unfolding of history and spirit, Geist. In his major work, The Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel traces the development of human consciousness through various stages, from basic sense perception to the highest form of self-awareness, culminating in absolute knowledge. This journey of spirit involves a dialectical progression where consciousness confronts its own limitations and through self-reflection, overcomes them. This process leads to reconciliation between the individual and the universal, between alienation and unity. Hegel's ideas, particularly his discussions of freedom, ethics, and the state, also have profound political implications. In his Philosophy of Right, Hegel argues that true freedom can only be realized within the framework of ethical life, Sittlichkeit, where individuals live in harmony with the laws and institutions of the state. For Hegel, the state is the embodiment of rational freedom and ethical community, where individual desires are reconciled with universal principles. Hegel's system also extends into art, religion, and philosophy, which he considers expressions of the absolute. Art, for Hegel, reveals the truth in sensory forms, while religion presents the absolute in the form of images and symbols. However, it is philosophy that offers the highest form of understanding, as it grasps the absolute in conceptual terms. Through these interrelated domains, Hegel provides a vision of reality as an integrated rational whole, where contradiction and opposition are essential forces driving historical and intellectual development. His philosophy not only attempts to explain the structure of reality, but also aims to reconcile the various spheres of human life, individual, social, artistic, and religious, within a comprehensive and dynamic framework. Dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Hegel's dialectic is often simplified into the formula of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but this is a misrepresentation of his nuanced method. The dialectical process, for Hegel, involves a constant movement between contradictions that drive progress, but not always in a triadic form. The key to understanding his dialectic lies in determinate negation, where the negation of a concept is not simply its opposite, but a necessary stage in the unfolding of something new. In his Science of Logic, Hegel explains that concepts are not static. They are subject to dynamic self-differentiation and sublation, meaning they are cancelled, preserved, and elevated simultaneously. Hegel's dialectic builds on the philosophical legacy of thinkers like Plato and Kant. For example, Kant used dialectical reasoning to show how human thought can generate contradictions, antinomies, when trying to go beyond the limits of empirical knowledge. However, while Kant believed such contradictions revealed the limits of reason, Hegel saw them as a way to go beyond them. In Hegel's system, these contradictions do not cancel each other out, but push the understanding toward a higher synthesis, leading to a more complete grasp of reality. Importantly, Hegel rejected any simplistic formulaic method of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Instead, he saw dialectic as a process where contradictions arise from within concepts themselves, reflecting their inherent instability. For example, in his famous analysis of being and nothing in the Logic, Hegel shows that these two categories, though seemingly opposed, are in fact inseparable and lead to the concept of becoming. This synthesis, however, is not the final resolution, but just another step in the dialectical development. Thus, Hegel's dialectic is not just a method, but a reflection of the nature of reality itself, where contradiction and negation are the forces driving all development. The dialectical process is not limited to abstract thought, but is found in nature, history, and human society, making it the principle of life, motion, and becoming in the world. Absolute Idealism. Hegel's philosophy is often labeled as Absolute Idealism, a system where reality is understood as fundamentally rational and structured by an overarching absolute. Unlike subjective idealism, which focuses on individual perceptions as the basis of reality, or transcendental idealism, as found in Kant's philosophy, Hegel's idealism suggests that reality itself is structured by thought and rational principles. The absolute, in Hegel's view, is the totality of reality, a rational, self-developing system that includes both thought and material existence. In contrast to earlier philosophers like Berkeley, who argued that only minds and ideas exist, Hegel's absolute idealism insists that the material world is not an illusion, but a necessary manifestation of the idea. For Hegel, the external world is a part of the self-realization of the absolute, and finite things, such as nature and individual human experiences, are stages in the unfolding of this greater unity. This dialectical process is the means through which the absolute comes to know itself, through the development and contradiction of finite beings. Crucially, the absolute is not a static entity, but something that is constantly becoming through dialectical processes. The finite world, with all its contradictions, is a necessary stage in the development of the absolute, as it seeks to reconcile itself with itself through these contradictions. Thus, every contradiction in the finite world, whether in nature, history, or thought, is ultimately a reflection of the self-differentiation of the absolute. The centrality of this idea in Hegel's thought means that the world is not a collection of static things, but a dynamic process of becoming, where each finite moment is a part of the whole. Hegel's absolute idealism provides the framework for his broader metaphysical claims about the nature of reality, history, and human consciousness. Phenomenology of Spirit, Geist. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Phenomenologie des Geistes, traces the development of consciousness from its simplest forms to the level of absolute knowing. The book describes a dialectical progression where individual forms of consciousness confront their contradictions and evolve into higher forms. The process is both historical and logical, showing how human thought moves from immediate, sensory experiences to complex forms of self-awareness and recognition. The progression begins with sense certainty, where consciousness engages with the world through direct sensory experience. However, Hegel shows that this is a flawed approach, as sense certainty cannot fully grasp the truth of its object. As consciousness realizes this limitation, it advances to more developed forms, such as perception and understanding. One of the most famous sections of the Phenomenology is the master-slave dialectic, which occurs in the chapter on self-consciousness. Here, Hegel introduces the notion of recognition as a key to self-awareness. In this dialectic, two individuals confront one another in a struggle for recognition. The conflict results in one becoming the master and the other the slave. Paradoxically, the slave, through labor and self-creation, achieves a deeper form of self-consciousness, while the master remains dependent on the slave for recognition. This dynamic of domination and servitude reflects a broader theme in Hegel's philosophy, that self-consciousness develops through external relationships and struggles. As consciousness progresses, it eventually reaches the stage of reason, where it begins to understand itself and the world as governed by rational laws. This prepares the way for the higher stages of spirit, Geist, where individuals recognize themselves as part of a collective ethical life. The final stage of development, absolute knowing, represents the reconciliation of all contradictions, where consciousness fully grasps the unity of subject and object, thought and reality. In this grand narrative, Hegel demonstrates that individual forms of consciousness are not isolated but interconnected moments in a larger, rational structure, the unfolding of Geist. The phenomenology not only charts the evolution of individual self-consciousness, but also reflects the historical development of human societies and cultures. It is a journey of alienation and reconciliation, leading to the ultimate realization that reality itself is rational and knowable. Master-slave dialectic. One of the most well-known parts of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit is the master-slave dialectic, a powerful narrative illustrating how self-consciousness develops through relationships of power and dependence. This dialectic is essential to understanding Hegel's ideas about recognition, freedom, and the formation of self-awareness. The dialectic begins with two self-conscious beings confronting one another. Each desires recognition from the other, but both wish to assert their own independence. This leads to a struggle, where one individual becomes the master, or lord, and the other the slave, or bondsman. On the surface, the master appears victorious, having achieved domination, while the slave is subjected to servitude. However, the outcome of this relationship is paradoxical. The master, by imposing labor on the slave, becomes dependent on the slave for the very acts that secure their superiority. Meanwhile, the slave, through labor and engagement with the material world, develops a deeper form of self-consciousness. In working to transform nature for the master, the slave comes to realize their own creative power and capacity for independence. This process of labor allows the slave to gain self-awareness, while the master, lost in enjoyment, stagnates. Hegel's dialectic does not end with the simple opposition of master and slave. It moves toward a deeper understanding of mutual recognition. The slave's labor leads them to a higher consciousness, eventually surpassing the master's limited self-awareness. This dialectical reversal underscores Hegel's idea that freedom and self-consciousness are realized not through domination, but through mutual recognition and struggle. This concept has had a profound influence, especially in discussions about power dynamics, social relations, and human development. It emphasizes that human beings are defined not only by their capacity for autonomy, but also by their relationships with others. And the recognition they seek is both a source of conflict and a path toward true freedom. History as rational. Hegel's philosophy of history is grounded in his belief that history is rational, meaning it follows a logical progression that reflects the development of human freedom and self-consciousness. According to Hegel, history is not a random series of events, but the unfolding of Geist, spirit, as it comes to recognize its own freedom. In this sense, history has a purpose. It is the story of the realization of freedom, which reaches its culmination in the modern state. Hegel's famous dictum, "What is rational is actual, and what is actual is rational," encapsulates this idea. For Hegel, the events and structures of history, especially the state, are expressions of rationality working itself out in time. History is a dialectical process where contradictions emerge and are resolved, moving toward ever greater stages of freedom. The development of political and social institutions reflects humanity's increasing awareness of its own nature as free and rational. In Hegel's view, history passes through stages where different forms of political organization and consciousness dominate. Ancient despotism, where only the ruler is free, gives way to classical Greece, where the concept of freedom is expanded to a collective sense within the city-state. However, it is only in the modern constitutional state that true freedom is realized, as individuals are both autonomous and governed by universal laws that they themselves endorse. Hegel's philosophy of history emphasizes the necessity of struggle and conflict. He famously described history as a slaughter bench on which the happiness of peoples, the wisdom of states, and the virtue of individuals have been sacrificed. Yet, these struggles are not meaningless. They represent the dialectical clash of opposing forces, ideas, institutions, cultures, that eventually lead to new, more rational forms of social organization. For Hegel, this process culminates in the modern European state, which embodies the highest realization of freedom. However, he also acknowledges that this is not the end of history in a literal sense, but rather the point where the fundamental principles of freedom and rationality have been recognized. Other societies may still undergo this process of historical development, but the essential logic of freedom has already been revealed. Hegel's vision of history has been both influential and controversial, particularly his claim that non-Western cultures have not yet realized true freedom. Critics have pointed out the Eurocentric and deterministic aspects of his philosophy, arguing that it privileges Western civilization as the pinnacle of historical development. However, Hegel saw history as the necessary unfolding of freedom, where each stage represents an advance in the self-consciousness of spirit. The state and ethical life, Sittlichkeit. In Hegel's political philosophy, the state is not just a governing body, but the embodiment of objective spirit, representing the rational and ethical culmination of human freedom. Ethical life, Sittlichkeit, is the realm where individual freedom is fully realized, not as mere personal liberty, but as a harmony between personal desires and universal principles embodied in institutions such as family, civil society, and the state. Hegel distinguishes between three spheres of ethical life. 1. The family. The family is the first and most basic ethical unit, bound by love. It represents a unity where individual wills are subordinated to the good of the family. Marriage, for instance, is not just a personal contract, but an ethical institution, where the couple's subjective wills are united in service to a higher ethical goal, the good of the family itself. 2. Civil society. When individuals enter adulthood, they move into civil society, a sphere characterized by competition and the pursuit of self-interest. However, through engagement in civil society, particularly in corporations, professional guilds, unions, individuals come to see their own personal freedom as dependent on the broader social framework. Civil society, while driven by self-interest, provides a space where freedom is realized through work and participation in a shared social order. 3. The state. For Hegel, the state is the highest form of ethical life, where individual freedom and collective interests are unified. The state is not an arbitrary external authority, but the realization of freedom in its fullest sense. It transcends the self-interest of civil society by embodying the ethical spirit of a people, their laws, traditions, and customs. The state safeguards individual rights and freedoms while ensuring the welfare of all citizens. Hegel's state is often misunderstood as authoritarian, but he emphasizes that the state is ethical only insofar as it guarantees both individual freedom and collective well-being. The state provides the framework for individual rights, freedom of conscience, and personal welfare, while also fostering a sense of common citizenship and moral obligation. Freedom, for Hegel, is only fully realized when individuals recognize their roles as part of a larger ethical whole, when they willingly identify with the state's laws and institutions as expressions of their own rational will. The concept, Begriff, Hegel's concept of Begriff, often translated as concept or notion, occupies a central role in his philosophy, particularly in his science of logic. The concept is not simply a mental category, but the dynamic, self-developing principle of reality. Hegel's system is built on the understanding that everything, including thought itself, follows a logical, self-differentiating process. The concept is the structure of this process, the force that organizes both thought and reality. For Hegel, the concept represents the unity of being and essence, mediating between abstract initial categories and more complex realities. It is at once the formal structure of thought and the actual unfolding of reality itself. The concept has three key moments: universality, particularity, and individuality. Universality is the most abstract and general moment. Particularity is the specification of the universal into distinct forms, and individuality is the synthesis of the two, where the universal finds concrete expression in the particular. What makes Hegel's concept distinctive is that it is not static. It develops through its own internal contradictions. As each stage of thought encounters limitations or oppositions, it leads to higher levels of understanding. The concept is thus a self-relating process, constantly moving from abstraction to concreteness, from indeterminacy to full realization. This development culminates in the absolute idea, where the concept becomes fully aware of itself as both thought and reality. The absolute idea is the realization that the world is a coherent, rational whole, where the concept governs the interrelation of all things. Therefore, The concept in Hegel's system is not merely a logical category, but the very engine of reality's self-unfolding, linking logic, nature, and spirit. Alienation and reconciliation. Hegel's concept of alienation and reconciliation is central to his philosophy, particularly in understanding the development of consciousness and freedom. Alienation refers to a condition where individuals or societies are estranged from their own essential nature or from the larger ethical and spiritual order. This is often experienced as a separation from one's true self from others or from the community. In Hegel's philosophy, alienation is not merely a negative condition, but a necessary stage in the development of consciousness. Through alienation, individuals become aware of the limitations of their current state and are driven to overcome this separation. Hegel uses this concept to describe the evolution of consciousness in the Phenomenology of Spirit, where the individual moves through various stages of self-awareness, each marked by a form of alienation from the whole. The process of reconciliation follows alienation and represents the resolution of this estrangement. Reconciliation is not a simple return to an earlier, harmonious state, but a higher integration where the contradictions and divisions that cause the alienation are resolved in a more comprehensive unity. For Hegel, reconciliation occurs when individuals come to recognize their place within the broader rational and spiritual order, understanding that the alienation was a necessary part of their development toward freedom. In the realm of politics and society, alienation occurs when individuals feel disconnected from the state or from the ethical life, Sittlichkeit, that Hegel considers essential for true freedom. Reconciliation, then, is the moment when individuals recognize that their personal freedom is realized through their participation in the ethical community. This reconciliation is not a suppression of individual desires, but their fulfillment within the framework of a rational and ethical order. Hegel's concepts of alienation and reconciliation also apply to his philosophy of history. History, for Hegel, is the story of spirit coming to know itself, moving from a state of alienation, through conflicts, wars, and social upheavals, toward reconciliation in the form of more rational and free societies. This process reflects Hegel's belief that freedom is not something given, but something achieved through struggle and the overcoming of contradictions. Art, religion, and philosophy. In Hegel's philosophy, art, religion, and philosophy are the three modes through which absolute spirit manifests itself, each representing different ways of understanding and engaging with reality. These modes are stages in humanity's pursuit of self-awareness, where the divine and the rational are comprehended through different forms of expression. 1. Art is the first stage, in which truth is revealed in a sensuous form. Art allows the spirit to externalize itself in a physical sensory medium, such as painting, sculpture, or music. In ancient civilizations, especially in Greek art, Hegel sees the highest expression of this form. Greek art, according to Hegel, achieves a balance between form and content, where the divine is embodied in human figures, revealing the unity of the physical and spiritual worlds. However, art has its limitations. As it primarily uses sensuous images, it cannot fully capture the depth of spirit or the complexities of rational thought. Therefore, it can only hint at deeper truths, which need to be expressed more conceptually. 2. Religion is the second stage, where the divine is apprehended not just through physical forms, but through images and stories. Religion allows people to contemplate the divine through narrative and ritual, providing a more complete understanding than art, but still relying on symbolic representations. For Hegel, Christianity represents the highest form of religion because it reveals the unity of the divine and the human through the incarnation of Christ. This represents the reconciliation of spirit with the material world. But even religion is limited because it remains bound to picture thinking, Vorstellung, and thus lacks the conceptual rigor to fully articulate the truth. 3. Philosophy is the final stage in the development of spirit where the absolute is comprehended through pure thought. Philosophy transcends the limitations of both art and religion by offering a conceptual, rational understanding of reality. In philosophy, the absolute is not represented symbolically, but grasped directly through dialectical reasoning. While Hegel considers all three forms as essential to human development, he places philosophy at the highest level because it achieves the most complete form of self-awareness and truth. Through philosophy, spirit comes to understand itself not merely as an abstract idea, but as the totality of reality, reconciling the contradictions inherent in both art and religion. Conclusion: the coherence of Hegel's system. Hegel's philosophy seeks to explain the entirety of reality through a system that unites thought, being, and nature in a dynamic, interconnected whole. His absolute idealism posits that all aspects of existence, whether in nature, human consciousness, or history, are expressions of a single rational principle, the absolute. Central to Hegel's approach is his view that the universe is not a static entity, but a process of continual development, driven by dialectical contradictions and resolutions. In Hegel's Science of Logic, he outlines a system of categories that serve as the building blocks for understanding reality. These categories, beginning with abstract concepts like pure being and progressing through more complex determinations, culminate in the absolute idea. This final category is not merely the sum of the preceding stages, but their resolution in a coherent system of self-differentiation. The logic thus functions as the blueprint for understanding the self-realizing totality that Hegel claims underpins all of existence. Hegel extends this systematic thinking into his philosophy of nature and philosophy of spirit, where the logical structures outlined in the logic are manifested in the material world and in human consciousness. Nature, in Hegel's view, is an externalization of the idea, albeit in an incomplete and imperfect form. It is only through the emergence of spirit, particularly in the realms of art, religion, and philosophy, that the absolute reaches full self-consciousness. The human mind, for Hegel, plays a crucial role in this process as it becomes the site where the idea reflects upon itself and grasps its own structure. A key aspect of Hegel's system is that each part is both self-contained and yet part of a greater whole. Each sphere, whether logical, natural, or spiritual, is a circle within the overarching circle of circles that constitutes the absolute. As Hegel famously stated, the true is the whole, meaning that truth is only fully understood when we grasp the interconnectedness of all aspects of reality, not in isolation, but as moments within the totality. Each moment in Hegel's system gains its meaning not independently, but through its relation to the whole. While this integrative vision offers a comprehensive framework, it also poses challenges. The sweeping ambition of Hegel's system risks subsuming the uniqueness of particular spheres, whether in art, politics, or nature, into a single, all-encompassing logic. Yet it is precisely this ambitious coherence that defines Hegel's philosophy. The dialectical process, where contradictions are necessary stages in the development of truth, enables Hegel to present a system where the tensions of life, alienation, conflict, and division, are ultimately resolved in a higher synthesis, one that reveals the unity of being and thought, subject and object. In this grand vision, Hegel's system does not just claim to explain reality, but also to actualize it, where philosophy becomes the highest form of self-awareness in which the absolute comes to know itself. This coherence, while demanding and complex, reflects Hegel's conviction that reality is rational, and that all contradictions, when fully understood, contribute to the realization of the absolute idea.